The obsidian walls of the High Synod hummed with the subsonic vibration of the station's gravitational stabilizers, a low, thrumming heartbeat that usually served to soothe the volatile temperaments of the gathered counselors. Yet today it seemed only to amplify the tension that thickened the air like coagulating blood. Shadows lengthened across the vast, circular chamber, cast by the flickering, erratic light of the central holographic projector which dominated the room, its sprawling display depicting a sector of space that should have been empty, a void between the territories of the Krellian ascendancy and the loose, chaotic coalition of the fringe worlds. But the void was not empty, and the anomaly that sat at the center of the display, a jagged scar of impossible geometry against the velvet black of the starfield, was the sole reason the high exarchs of the 12 subjugated systems had been summoned from their viceroyalties to stand in the presence of Grand Marshal Vok. Vok himself, a creature of towering stature whose chitinous armor was scarred by the plasma burns of 100 campaigns, stood at the precipice of the command dais, his multifaceted eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the sensor readings that scrolled down the periphery of the hologram in a cascading waterfall of incomprehensible data. The silence in the chamber was absolute, save for the rhythmic hiss of atmospheric cyclers and the nervous shifting of Ambassador Thera, the representative of the Valari technocracy, whose delicate, translucent skin flushed with a violet hue of barely suppressed terror. She was the only one among them who had dared to suggest that the object was not a natural phenomenon, not a rogue asteroid or a collapsing hyperlane, but a construct, and for her insolence, she had nearly been ejected from the airlock. Yet as the telemetry refined itself, as the blurry edges of the object sharpened into focus, the mocking laughter of the Krellian warlords had died in their throats, replaced by a cold, gnawing dread that none of them wished to articulate. "It defies the fundamental laws of propulsion," Vok rumbled, his voice a grinding tectonic shift of vocal cords that had not been used for diplomacy in decades, his clawed hand tightening on the railing of the dais until the metal groaned in protest. "The mass readings suggest a planetary body, yet the thermal signature is negligible, colder than the background radiation of the cosmos, and it moves without inertia, without the telltale flare of ion drives or the spatial distortion of a warp manifold. It simply exists, and then it is closer." He turned his gaze upon Fleetmaster Gorn, a grizzled veteran of the Corward expansions, who shrank under the scrutiny, his mandibles clicking together in a nervous tick that betrayed his composure. "Explain this, Gorn. Your patrols were the first to encounter the anomaly. Your reports claimed it was a sensor ghost, a glitch in the long-range arrays. Does a glitch cast a shadow that eclipses a star? Does a glitch broadcast a silence so profound it jams our subspace frequencies with the sheer weight of its nothingness?" Gorn stepped forward, his heavy boots clanking on the polished stone floor, holding out a data slate with trembling hands, the holographic interface flickering as he tried to stabilize the image. "My liege, the initial readings were contradictory. Our targeting computers could not lock onto a center of mass because the object appears to absorb active scans. When we fired the warning probes, they didn't detonate. They simply ceased to transmit. It was as if they passed an event horizon from which no data could return. We assumed it was a singularity, a wandering black hole masked by some exotic matter shell, but then it corrected its course." The gasp that rippled through the gathered counselors was audible, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen from the room, for the implication of Gorn's words was a heresy against the established order of the galaxy, a challenge to the supremacy of the ascendancy which had ruled the stars with an iron fist for 1,000 cycles. To correct course implied intent. To have intent implied intelligence. And to possess an intelligence capable of piloting a vessel the size of a small moon, a vessel that swallowed energy and defied physics, meant that there was a power in the galaxy that the Krellian war machine had not only failed to detect, but was woefully ill-equipped to challenge. Ambassador Thera stepped forward, her robes shimmering like oil on water, her voice trembling but resonant with the courage of one who knows they are right despite the danger. "It is not a singularity, Grand Marshal," she said softly, her large, dark eyes fixed on the ominous shape in the hologram. "It is a ship, and we have seen the aesthetic markers before, though never on this scale, never with this level of sophistication. The angularity of the hull, the utilitarian brutality of T. He designed concealed beneath the advanced shielding. It bears the signature of the Terrans." A roar of laughter erupted from the back of the chamber, initiated by Subcommander Crix, a brute of a warrior who wore the skulls of conquered kings on his bandolier, his mockery echoing off the vaulted ceiling like the bark of an untamed beast. The Terrans, the primates from the Sol system. Crix spat on the floor, the acidic saliva hissing as it ate into the stone. Do not insult the intelligence of this council, Valeri. The humans are scavengers, merchants, traders of soft metals and softer philosophies. Their ships are modular crates held together by magnetic tape and hope. They possess no fleets capable of this. They barely survived the skirmishes with the Zorgan raiders. You speak of them as if they were titans of the ancient era, but they are nothing more than biological accidents who stumbled upon FTL drive technology before they had even mastered their own planetary climate. Vok did not laugh. He raised a hand, silencing Crix instantly, for Vok remembered the few encounters he had had with humanity, encounters that had been brief, confusing, and ultimately dismissed as irrelevant. Humans were indeed small, soft, and lacking in natural weaponry. They had no claws, no venom sacs, no carapace. They bled easily. They died easily. But in every report Vok had ever read, buried deep in the tactical appendices, there was a recurring footnote. The humans did not panic. When their ships were burning, when their stations were breached, when death was inevitable, the humans became eerily calm, organizing their demise with a logical efficiency that was alien to the warrior castes of the galaxy who thrived on fury and adrenaline. Zoom in on the hull, Vok commanded, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. Enhance the lateral sector where the light from the binary star hits the surface. If it is human, there will be markings. They are a species obsessed with labels, with naming things that belong to the void. The technicians at the control consoles worked frantically, their fingers flying across haptic interfaces, stripping away layers of visual noise, compensating for the gravimetric distortion that surrounded the object. The image on the central projector blurred, pixelated, and then resolved into terrifying clarity. There, etched into the dark, matte metal of the hull, letters of colossal scale, each 1 kilometer high, burned with a stark, white luminescence that cut through the gloom of space. The script was archaic, blocky, and unmistakable to anyone who had studied the lexicons of the minor species. UNSC, OMEGAPOINT. And beneath that, a symbol, a stylized bird of prey clutching a bundle of arrows and an olive branch enclosed within a globe. Omega Point, Thyra whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. The end of the line, the final argument. Vok stared at the name, feeling a cold sensation trickle down his spine, a sensation he had not felt since he was a hatchling hiding in the swamps of Krell Prime from the predators of the night. Fear, pure, primal fear, not of the weapon itself, but of the implication. If the humans, the soft, trading, philosophical humans had built this, then everything the Ascendancy knew about the balance of power was a lie. How? Vok demanded, turning to the council, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. How do they hide the construction of a vessel this size? The resources required would drain a sector dry. The energy signature of the welding alone should have lit up our sensors like a supernova. Unless... He trailed off, the realization hitting him with the force of a kinetic impactor. Unless they didn't build it here, unless they built it somewhere else, somewhere beyond the rim, somewhere where we could not see. It is moving again, a technician shouted, panic rising in his voice, his composure shattering as the readings on his console spiked into the red. Grand Marshal, the vessel, it is not using a warp drive. It is folding space. It is compressing the distance between its location and the High Synod station. Impact, arrival imminent. By the gods, it is already here. The station shook. It was not the violent shudder of an explosion or the rattle of impact, but a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the marrow of their bones. A groan of metal and stone being subjected to gravitational tides that threatened to tear the station apart at the molecular level. The holographic display shorted out, dissolving into static before reforming to show a view from the external cameras. The stars were gone. The view was filled entirely by a wall of gray metal, a surface so vast and featureless it looked like the floor of a planet, stretching out in all directions to the edge of the visual field. The human ship had not just arrived, it had enveloped them. It hung in the void above the Krellian capital. Stationed like a descending god, its shadow plunging the entire orbital ring into twilight. Shields, Vok roared, his warrior instincts taking over, overriding the paralysis of awe. Launch all alert fighters, charge the orbital defense batteries. If they want to fight, we will give them a death worthy of the Ascendancy. Sirens wailed, a discordant symphony of alarm that echoed through the corridors of the station. But even as the Krellian fleet mobilized, swarming out of their hangars like angry hornets, There was a sense of futility in their movements. The human ship did not fire. It did not deploy fighters. It simply hung there, a monolith of silence. The Krellian destroyers, sleek and predatory, opened fire, their plasma cannons lighting up the void with streaks of green fire, torpedoes streaking toward the gray hull with trails of burning exhaust. The counselors watched on the main screen, holding their breath, waiting for the explosions, waiting for the debris, waiting for the satisfaction of seeing the human arrogance shattered. But there were no explosions. The plasma bolts struck the hull of the Omega Point and vanished. They did not deflect. They did not detonate. They were absorbed. The energy simply dissipated upon contact, rippling across the surface of the human ship like raindrops falling into a deep, still ocean. The torpedoes, programmed with advanced seeking algorithms, lost their lock seconds before impact, their guidance systems overwhelmed by some invisible electronic countermeasure, causing them to drift harmlessly into the void or spiral out of control. "Report," Vok barked, slamming his fist onto the console. "Why are the weapons ineffective? What kind of shielding is that?" The tactical officer looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. "It's not shielding, Grand Marshal, it's geometry. The hull is manipulating the localized space-time curvature. Our weapons aren't hitting the ship because the space they occupy is being folded around it. We are firing at a ghost." Suddenly, the lights in the chamber died. The hum of the ventilation stopped. The gravity plating flickered and then stabilized at a lower setting, leaving the counselors feeling light, unmoored. The screens went black, plunging the room into darkness, before a single, stark white spotlight illuminated the center of the chamber, originating from nowhere. A voice echoed through the hall, not over the intercoms, but seemingly projected directly into their minds, a voice that was calm, synthetic, yet undeniably human in its cadence. It was not a shout of conquest, nor a threat of annihilation. It was a polite, bureaucratic request. "Attention, Krellian High Synod. This is Admiral Elias Thorne of the United Nations Space Command Vessel Omega Point. We apologize for the intrusion and the disruption to your power grid. Your reactor output was fluctuating in a manner that suggested hostile intent, so we have temporarily dampened your energy infrastructure to prevent an escalation. We request an audience with your leadership regarding the immediate cessation of hostilities in the Cygni sector. Please respond." The audacity was suffocating. They had shut down the power of the capital station of the most feared empire in the galaxy, rendered their fleet impotent, and apologized for the inconvenience like a neighbor complaining about noise. Vok stood in the darkness, his chest heaving with rage, but his mind, honed by centuries of warfare, recognized the tactical reality. They were defenseless. The humans could vaporize them in an instant, or simply leave them to suffocate in the dark. Negotiation was not a choice. It was the only path to survival. "Open a channel," Vok growled into the darkness. "Let us hear what the primates have to say." The spotlight expanded and the holographic projector reactivated, but instead of the tactical map, it displayed the bridge of the human ship. The contrast was jarring. Where the Krellian command decks were dark, cramped, and filled with the steam of coolant pipes, the human bridge was a cathedral of light and space. It looked more like a park or a university atrium than a war room. Sunlight, simulated or real, streamed through transparent viewports, illuminating rows of pristine white consoles staffed by humans in crisp gray uniforms who worked with a quiet, focused intensity. In the center, seated not on a throne but in a simple, ergonomic chair, sat Admiral Elias Thorne. He was an older man, his hair the color of steel wool, his face lined with the deep crevices of fatigue and sorrow. He held a ceramic cup in one hand and a data pad in the other. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a tired teacher waiting for an unruly class to settle down. "Grand Marshal Vok," Thorne said, nodding slightly, his image crisp and life-sized in the Krellian chamber. "And the representatives of the Valeri, the Gorn, and the others, thank you for receiving us. I understand our arrival was abrupt. We find that prolonged approaches tend to generate unnecessary panic, and we are on a tight schedule." Vok stepped into the light, puffing out his chest to maximize his intimidating silhouette. "You have violated our sovereign space, human. You have attacked our fleet." Thorne cut him off, gently but firmly. "We have not fired a single shot, Marshal. We have merely negated your ability to fire yours. There is a difference. We are not here to fight you. We are here to enforce the armistice of the 7th Quadrant." "The armistice?" Vok scoffed. "A piece of paper signed by weakling species to protect themselves from the strong. The Krellian ascendancy recognizes no such treaty." Thorne sighed, taking a sip from his cup, looking down at the liquid as if searching for patience. We know that is why we are here. You see, for the last 2 centuries, humanity has been busy. We have been observing. We have watched you conquer the Xanthurians. We watched you strip-mine the moons of Opal. We watched as you enslaved the sentient fungoids of the Delta Rift. We did nothing because we adhered to a policy of non-interference. We believed that the galaxy would find its own equilibrium. He looked up, and for the first time, Vox saw the steel behind the old man's eyes. It was cold, hard, and utterly unyielding. We were wrong. The equilibrium you seek is the silence of the grave, and we have decided that we can no longer afford to be passive observers. Ambassador Thyra stepped forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Admiral, with respect, humanity has always been a minor player, a Tier 2 civilization at best. How did you build this? The Omega Point, it creates its own gravity well. It phases through weapon fire. This is technology that borders on the divine. Where did you find it? Thorn offered a small, sad smile. We didn't find it, Ambassador. We earned it. You see, while you were building taller walls and sharper claws, we were looking inward and outward. We stopped fighting each other. We stopped fighting for land, for resources. We poured the entirety of our species' aggression, our paranoia, our genius for destruction into a single project. We realized that if we wanted to survive in a galaxy of wolves, we didn't need to be a bigger wolf. We needed to be the cage. The cage, Vok repeated, the word sounding alien on his tongue. You speak in riddles, you claim to be peaceful, yet you bring a weapon of mass intimidation to my doorstep. Thorn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Not intimidation, Marshal, insurance. The Omega Point is not a warship in the traditional sense. It carries no orbital bombardment cannons. It has no invasion forces. It is a suppression platform. Its primary function is the localized negation of high-energy reactions. Fission, fusion, antimatter, plasma acceleration. Inside the field generated by this ship, those processes become inert. We don't need to blow you up. We just need to arrive and your guns stop working. Your engines stop working. Your reactors go cold. You are left with nothing but your words and your fists. And we have found that when you take away the ability to incinerate a city from orbit, people are much more willing to talk. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. The humans had not built a better gun. They had built a switch that turned off everyone else's guns. It was the ultimate checkmate. The Krellian Empire was built on the threat of overwhelming force, on the ability to glass planets. Without that, they were just a collection of angry biologicals on floating metal cans. This is tyranny, Vok roared, his voice cracking with desperation. You cannot simply disarm a sovereign empire. It is a violation of natural law. The strong rule the weak. Thorn's expression hardened. The strong protect the weak, Marshal. That is the lesson we learned the hard way. And regarding tyranny, we are not taking your territory. We are not demanding tribute. We are simply stating that from this point forward, acts of large-scale aggression in this sector are physically impossible while we are present. You can govern your people, you can trade, you can expand peacefully, but the wars stop. Today. And if we refuse, Vok challenged, though he knew the answer. If we ram your ship, if we send millions of soldiers to board you. Thorn tapped his data pad and a new image appeared, a tactical simulation of the space around them. The Omega Point is surrounded by a graviton shear field. Any object attempting to impact the hull at a velocity capable of causing damage is simply redirected. As for boarding parties, we have transporters. We would simply beam your soldiers back to their barracks, disarmed and perhaps a little nauseous. Marshal, please understand. We have run the simulations. There is no scenario where you defeat this vessel. There is no scenario where you initiate a conflict that we cannot pause. We are not asking for your surrender. We are asking for your compliance with peace. It is not a request. Silence descended on the chamber again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. The invincible Krellian ascendancy had been rendered obsolete not by a greater fire, but by a bucket of water poured on their fuse. Fleetmaster Gorn looked at his hands, realizing that his skills, his career, his entire life's purpose had just been nullified. Ambassador Thyra looked at the human admiral with a mix of awe and terror. This was the humanity fuck yeah moment she had read about in the ancient speculative fictions of the Terrans, the moment where the underestimated apes revealed that while the galaxy was playing checkers, they had been mastering four-dimensional chess. But there was something else in Thorn's eyes, a shadow that didn't fit the triumphant narrative. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man racing against a clock. Admiral, Thyra said, her voice piercing the quiet. You said you have been busy. You said you poured everything into this project. Why now? If you have had this capability, why wait until the Krellians threaten the Cygni sector? Why reveal your hand today? Thorn looked at her, and for a moment the distance between them, light years and biological imperatives, vanished. Because we ran out of time, Ambassador. The Omega Point wasn't built for the Krellians. You are, with all due respect, a localized nuisance. We built this ship, and the 6 others like it that are currently positioning themselves in other sectors, because of what is coming behind us. Atmosphere in the room shifted from political tension to primal dread. Vok forgot his anger. "What is coming?" he asked, his voice low. Thorn stood up, walking to the massive viewport on his bridge. He looked out at the stars, his back to the camera. "Long-range sensors, not ours, but ancient ones we found on Mars and then confirmed with listening posts in the deep void. There is a signal, a migration, something from outside the galactic plane. It consumes energy. It consumes civilizations. We call it the entropy tide. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't conquer. It eats." He turned back to face them. "We built the Omega Point class not to police you, but to save you. The suppression field isn't just to stop your weapons. It's designed to harden the fabric of spacetime, to create a barrier that the tide cannot cross. But we cannot do it alone. The field requires immense power, more than we can generate. We need your reactors. We need the Krellian industrial output. We need the Valeri scientific minds. We need the Zorgan fleet logistics." Thorn leaned into the camera, his face filling the screen, every line of worry magnified. "We didn't come here to stop your war because we are moralists. We came here to stop your war because you are wasting resources that we are all going to need if we want to be alive in 10 years. The Krellian fleet is powerful, yes. But against the tide, your plasma cannons are matchsticks. We need to retrofit your ships. We need to link your grids to our network. We are forming a galactic shield wall, and the Omega Point is the anchor." The revelation struck the High Synod like a physical shockwave. The humans weren't the police. They were the engineers of the dam, frantically trying to plug the holes before the floodwaters hit. The most feared warship was actually an arc, a shield, a desperate gamble for survival. Vok looked at the hologram, then at the silent, gray giant filling his window. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by the clarity of a soldier who realizes the true enemy is finally visible. The squabbles over territory, the pride of the ascendancy, the law of claws, it all seemed pathetically small against the backdrop of extinction. He looked at Gorn, then at Thyra. He saw the same realization in their eyes. The humans had surely terrified them, yes. They had humiliated the Krellian military. But they had also offered a hand of steel, cold and heavy, but a hand nonetheless. "The suppression field," Vok asked, his voice steady now, the voice of a marshal addressing a peer. "If we link our reactors to your grid, can it be expanded to cover the outer rim?" Thorn nodded. "If we work together, if we stop shooting at each other long enough to calibrate the frequencies, yes, we can cover the ascendancy, we can cover the Valeri worlds, but we have to start now. The tide enters the galactic halo in 6 months." Vok walked back to the center of the dais. He looked at the empty tactical display, then at the human admiral. He straightened his spine, crossing his 4 arms over his chest in the traditional salute of a warrior acknowledging a superior strategist. "Admiral Thorn," Vok rumbled, the sound echoing through the silent chamber. "The Krellian ascendancy does not surrender, but we do accept alliances against existential threats. If your Omega Point can hold the line, my flea. ETS will provide the power. My engineers will interface with your systems." He paused, a low growl escaping his throat, almost a chuckle. "And perhaps after we survive this tide, you can teach us how to build a ship that doesn't need to fire." Thorn smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Deal, but Vok, don't get your hopes up. It's mostly just a lot of math and stubbornness. We're humans, it's what we do." The connection cut, the hologram fading, leaving the High Synod in the dim emergency lighting. But the fear was gone. The paralyzing terror of the unknown had been replaced by a grim, purposeful resolve. The monster at the door wasn't the human ship. The human ship was the door itself, and they had just been invited to help hold it shut. As the lights flickered back on, powered now by the auxiliary feed, Ambassador Thyra walked to the viewport. The Omega Point still hung there, massive and silent, blotting out the stars. It was terrifying, yes. It was a weapon of absolute denial. But as she watched, she saw small shuttles launching from its bays, heading toward the Krellian station. They weren't landing crafts. They were diplomatic shuttles, engineering pinnaces. The humans were coming not to rule, but to work. She realized then why the humans were so feared and yet so successful. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they made their enemies obsolete by changing the game entirely. The galaxy had been playing at war. Humanity had been preparing for survival. And as the first human shuttle touched down in the hangar of the High Synod, the most feared warship in the galaxy began to glow, not with the red of weapons fire, but with the soft, blue pulse of a shield coming online, a heartbeat of unity that would echo across the stars, signaling the end of the petty wars and the beginning of the long watch. The humans had arrived. And for the first time in history, The galaxy was safe, not because it was peaceful, but because the humans had decided that it was not allowed to die. The transition from the High Synod to the engineering decks of the Omega Point was a journey not just through space, but through philosophy. Where the Krellian station was a testament to hierarchy and intimidation, vaulted ceilings meant to dwarf the individual sharp angles to suggest danger. The interior of the human vessel was a study in aggressive utilitarianism, softened by a desperate need for normalcy. Vok, having been shuttled over alongside a delegation of his highest-ranking engineers in Thyra, found himself walking down a corridor that was wide enough to drive a tank through, yet the walls were lined with something he had not expected: vegetation. Hydroponic ivy climbed the bulkheads, and the air smelled of ozone and wet earth, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of his own ships. "Psychological grounding," Thorne explained as he led them, his gait brisk. "We found that crews on deep space suppression missions go insane if they stare at gray metal for 3 years. The plants scrub the code too, but mostly they remind us that we are fighting for a living universe, not a dead one." Vok grunted, his eyes scanning the humans they passed. They were small, soft-skinned, lacking natural armor. A Krellian warrior could snap one in half with a single manipulator claw, yet none of them flinched as the massive alien warlord walked by. They looked at him with curiosity, some with professional disinterest, glancing at data pads. There was no fear. This disturbed Vok more than the ship's weapons. To be fearless in the presence of a predator meant one of two things: stupidity or the absolute certainty of safety. "Your crew," Vok rumbled. "They do not carry weapons." "No," Thorne said, stopping at a blast door that hissed open to reveal the engineering cathedral, a cavernous space that spanned the vertical length of the ship, dominated by a pulsating core of white light that seemed to be trapped within a cage of singing crystal. "Weapons on board are a liability. If we have a security breach that requires small arms, we've already lost. Besides, the ship is the weapon, or the shield, rather." He gestured to the core. "The singularity siphon. We don't generate power in the traditional sense. We draw it from the vacuum energy of the microtears we create in reality. It's unstable technology. We're basically harnessing the friction of the universe rubbing against itself." Thyra gasped, her scientific mind reeling. Vacuum energy extraction? Theoretical models suggest that would require a stabilization field of infinite complexity, if the containment fails. "The ship implodes and takes the solar system with it," Thorne finished her sentence matter-of-factly. "Which is why we are very, very careful, and why we need your help. As the entropy tide approaches, the background stress on spacetime increases. Our siphons are starting to jitter. We need the Krellian solid-state fusion grids to act as a buffer, a redundant power supply to out the spikes. If we rely solely on the siphon when the tide hits, we might crack the lens." Vok looked at the core, feeling the hair on his carapace stand on end. The humans were riding a bomb the size of a moon, held together by math and hope, and they were steering it into the path of a cosmic hurricane. "You are insane," Vok said, but there was admiration in his tone. "You risk total annihilation to save civilizations that despise you." "We don't do it for gratitude," Thorne said, leading them to a suspended walkway overlooking the core. "We do it because the alternative is silence. Look, Marshall, humanity spent its infancy terrified of the dark. We invented fire to push it back. Then we invented electricity. Then fusion. This ship, it's just a bigger fire, and the dark out there is getting colder." The integration process began immediately. It was a clash of cultures that would have been impossible a day prior. Krellian engineers, accustomed to bashing metal into submission and overriding safety protocols for performance, found themselves working alongside human technicians who treated every decimal point of energy output as a religious text. The Krellians wanted to overclock the buffers. The humans insisted on redundancy. Arguments broke out in binary cant and guttural roars, translated by hovering drones. But slowly, a rhythm emerged. The humans respected the Krellian intuitive grasp of high-yield plasma flow. The Krellians grew to respect the human obsession with fail-safes. They found that the human weakness, their caution, was the only thing keeping the Omega Point from tearing itself apart. Deep in the tactical center, Vok stood over the master plot with Thorne. The holographic display now showed the combined fleets. The Krellian armada, a swarm of jagged daggers, was forming a geometric lattice around the human sphere. "My destroyers are linking their main deflector dishes," Vok explained, pointing a claw at the formation. "We will channel our reactor output into a cohesive beam, feeding it directly into your collection arrays. It will be uncomfortable for my crews." The radiation bleed will be significant. We can mitigate that, Thorne said, tapping the console. We're deploying drone swarms to act as heat sinks between your ships and ours. We won't let your people cook, Vok. Vok looked at the human. Why, they are soldiers. Expendability is part of their duty. Thorne stopped, looking up from the screen. Not to us. Expendable is a word we erased from our military doctrine after the Centaurian sieges. Every life is an investment. Every mind is a resource. If we throw lives away, we become no better than the tide. We save everyone, Marshal, or we die trying. Those are the rules of the House. Vok fell silent. The logic was strange, alien, yet compelling. It was a strength he hadn't considered, the loyalty inspired by a leader who refused to spend lives like currency. He found himself straightening his sash. Very well, the drone sinks will be accepted, but tell me, Thorne, this tide, what is it? You speak of it as a force of nature, but you give it a name. Thorne's face darkened. He keyed a sequence into the console, bringing up a file that was heavily encrypted. It's not just a wave of energy, Vok, it's a swarm, self-replicating machines. Von Neumann probes gone wrong, or perhaps gone exactly right. They harvest matter to build more of themselves. They strip planets to the bedrock. They strip stars of their corona. They don't hate us, they just process us. He zoomed out the map to the intergalactic void. A red stain was spreading toward their galaxy. We encountered a scout element 50 years ago near the edge of the Perseus Arm, one ship. It took 3 of our fleets to kill it. We lost 6 million people. That was one scout. The tide is billions of them. Billions, Vok whispered. The scale was impossible. And you think this suppression field can stop them? The probes rely on high-energy transmission for coordination and propulsion, Thorne explained. The Omega point effect renders their drive systems inert. It turns them into bricks. If we can maintain the field across the sector, they hit a wall where their physics simply stop working. They pile up. They starve. But the field has to be absolute. If it flickers for a microsecond, they push through. The weeks that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The Valeri scientists arrived, bringing with them crystalline computation matrices that enhanced the human targeting algorithms by a factor of 10. The Zorgan raiders, usually pirates, were shamed into joining by the Krellian Declaration, bringing their scrappy, overtuned engines to add to the power grid. For the first time in galactic history, the Grand Council was not a room of politicians arguing over trade routes, but a chaotic, unified workspace where a dozen species worked toward a singular goal. The Omega point sat at the center, the heart of a growing web of laser links and power conduits. And then the sensors screamed. It didn't start with a visual, it started with the silence. The background static of the universe, the cosmic microwave background, simply vanished from the sensors facing the galactic rim. It was as if someone had drawn a curtain over the stars. "Contact!" shouted a human lieutenant on the bridge. "Gravimetric waves incoming, magnitude off the scale, it's the tide." "Red alert," Thorne said, his voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding his system. "Signal the Krellian fleet. Initiate linkage phase 1. Vok, you're on the comms, keep your people steady." Vok stood on the bridge of the Omega point, acting as the liaison to the Armada. "All ships," he roared into the channel, his voice amplified to reach every captain in the fleet. "Hold formation. The enemy comes to consume. We will make them choke. Engage power transfer." Outside, space lit up. Thousands of Krellian warships fired, not weapons, but beams of pure energy, thick cords of blue and white light that converged on the Omega point. The human ship began to hum, a sound that transcended hearing and vibrated in the teeth. The gray hull began to glow, shifting to a blinding white. The singularity siphon roared, drinking the power, amplifying it, and projecting it outward in a sphere of distortion. The tide arrived. They were not ships in the conventional sense. They were jagged shards of black crystal, ranging from the size of a fighter to the size of a city. They moved in a swarm that blotted out the nebulae, a flowing river of darkness. They slammed into the perimeter of the suppression field. The effect was instantaneous. The lead elements of the tide simply died, their internal lights extinguished. Their momentum carried them forward, but they were ballistic debris now, tumbling lifelessly. They smashed into each other, creating a wall of wreckage, but behind them billions more pressed on. The sheer kinetic mass of the swarm began to push against the field. The Omega point shuddered. "Field integrity at 98%, the ops officer called out. "Strain on the emitters is rising. The mass of the wreckage is creating a localized gravity well that's fighting our field." "Ambassador Thyra," Thorne snapped. The Valeri crystal matrix. Can we oscillate the field frequency, use the wreckage as a physical shield? Calculating, Thyra responded from her station, her fingers moving so fast they blurred. Yes, if we pulse the field, we can use the dead ships to create a physical barrier against the live ones, but it requires precise timing. If we pulse too slow, they breach. Do it, Thorn ordered. Vok, tell your fleet to pour everything they have into the grid. Safety limits are rescinded. Burn the engines if you have to. You heard the Admiral, Vok bellowed. Push the reactors to critical. If we burn, for the ascendancy, for the galaxy. The space around the Omega Point became a cauldron of energy. The Krellian ships were venting plasma, their hulls glowing cherry red from the heat of their own output. The Valeri crystals sang with harmonic resonance, and the human ship held. The field pulsed, a heartbeat of denial. Each pulse shattered the oncoming wave of machines, turning them into a barrier of dead metal. The wall of debris grew thicker, kilometers deep, a graveyard of the invaders. But the tide was intelligent. Seeing the frontal assault failing, the swarm shifted. Great tendrils of black ships broke off, spiraling above and below the galactic plane, attempting to flank the suppression sphere. They're flanking, Gorn reported from his destroyer. We cannot track them all. The field geometry is spherical, but if they spread out enough, they will find the weak points at the poles. Thorn looked at the tactical map. He closed his eyes for a second. The decision was made. We need to expand the field, overload the siphon. Admiral, the engineering chief warned, if we overload, the core will destabilize. We won't just lose the ship. We'll create a naked singularity. We'll be crushed. We're not going to be crushed, Thorn said, opening his eyes. We're going to eject the core. Silence on the bridge. To eject the core was to strip the Omega Point of its heart, to leave it drifting and powerless. But the core, unshielded, would detonate with the force of a supernova, but a supernova of suppression energy. It would expand the field to the size of a solar system for a brief moment, permanently frying everything in the vicinity. We have to time it, Thorn said. We lure them in close, let them think the field is failing. When they converge on us to feed, we drop the core and we jump. Jump, Vok asked. You said the drive creates drag. Emergency blind jump, Thorn said. Short range, just enough to get outside the blast radius. It's suicide odds, but it's the only card we have left. Do it, Vok said, baring his teeth. It is a good day to gamble. The order went out. The Omega Point began to power down the field. To the tide, it looked like the prey was dying. The swarm surged forward, the Black River converging into a spear point aimed directly at the human ship. Closer, closer. The sensors screamed as the machines entered visual range, their mechanical claws reaching out. Now, Thorn shouted. The ventral bay of the Omega Point opened. The glowing sphere of the singularity siphon was ejected into the void. At the same moment, the Omega Point's emergency thrusters fired, and the warp drive kicked in with a scream of tearing metal. The core detonated. It was not an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of stillness. A wave of white anti-energy expanded at light speed. It passed through the Krellian fleet, which had been warned to shut down all systems, washing over them harmlessly. But when it hit the tide, the effect was catastrophic. The complex quantum networks that bound the swarm mind together were instantly severed. The energy bonds holding their matter together unraveled. Billions of machines didn't just stop, they dissolved. They turned into clouds of molecular dust. The wave expanded, clearing the sector, wiping the sky clean of the threat. The Omega Point reappeared 1,000,000 kilometers away, drifting, dark, its hull scorched and buckled from the stress of the jump. The bridge was dark, illuminated only by sparks from fried consoles. Status, Thorn rasped, coughing in the smoke. We're alive, the ops officer whispered. Hull breach on decks 4 through 12. Main power is gone, we're on batteries, but look. Thorn dragged himself to the viewport. The space where the tide had been was empty, save for a shimmering nebula of dust that caught the light of the stars. The threat was gone. Transmission from the Krellian flagship, the comms officer said. Vok's voice came through, crackling with static but filled with a new tone, reverence. Admiral Thorn, the enemy is dust. We are reading no active signatures. You did it. We did it, Thorn corrected, leaning back in his chair, the exhaustion finally overtaking him. We did it, Vok. The aftermath was not a celebration, but a solemn rebuilding. The Krellian ships towed the crippled Omega Point to the nearest shipyard, a Krellian shipyard. There, Krellian engineers worked alongside humans to repair the hull. The Valeri offered advanced medical aid to the injured crew. The fear that had defined the relationship between the species had evaporated, replaced by the bond of blood and fire. 6 months later, the High Synod convened again, but the atmosphere was different. The shadows were gone, replaced by bright lights and open air. At the center of the dais stood Admiral Thorn, now walking with a cane, flanked by Grand Marshal Vok and Ambassador Thyra. "The Treaty of the Anchor," Thorn spoke to the assembled galaxy, his voice broadcast to 1,000 worlds. "It is not a treaty of non-aggression. It is a treaty of mutual defense. The Omega Point is being repaired, and 3 more ships of its class are being constructed in the Krellian shipyards. We have proven that we can stop the dark. But we also know that the tide was just the beginning. The universe is full of things that want to eat us." He looked out at the crowd, at the rows of aliens who had once looked at humans as soft prey. "Humanity used to be afraid," Thorn said. "We built walls, we built weapons, we hid. But we learned that the only way to be truly safe is to make sure your neighbor is safe too. The Omega Point is no longer a human ship. It is the first vessel of the Galactic Defense Initiative. Its captain will be Krellian, its science officer Valeri, its chief engineer human. We are the shield now, all of us." Vok stepped forward, placing a massive hand on Thorn's shoulder. "The galaxy used to fear the human warship," the warlord rumbled, "because we thought it came to conquer. Now we know the truth. It is the most feared ship in the galaxy by our enemies, because it is the ship that does not kill. It is the ship that ensures we all live." The image faded, leaving the history books to record the day the galaxy grew up. The humans, the underestimated primates from the dirtball called Earth, had not conquered the stars with fire. They had conquered them with a shield, and in doing so, they had turned a galaxy of predators into a family of guardians. The Omega Point drifted in orbit, gleaming with new armor, a silent sentinel against the night, proving that the ultimate victory was not destroying the enemy, but uniting the survivors. And deep in the void, where the remnants of the tide drifted as dust, the universe took note. The humans were here, and they had brought their friends.